Ladies and gentlemen, I don't need to tell you that the subject of the United States and Central Asia is not an ancient topic. One of the first official people to go there was a young diplomat named Schuyler from upstate New York, an old New York name, but he was posted at the American Embassy in Petersburg and managed to con his ambassador into permission to let him just go off for a few weeks and travel around Central Asia, which he did, and he took notes and he wrote a book about it. That is one of the earliest official contacts. Then on the unofficial side, but intellectual side, the real first prime mover was a man with the curious name of Raphael Pumpelly. Raphael Pumpelly was a geologist, first-class geologist, taught at Harvard for years, and he was, after working on the U.S. Geological Survey for many years, he got interested in the earliest human beings and came up with a theory that Central Asia was where it all happened, specifically the southern rim. He said this was all underwater at one point, and up in the mountains, just the edge of the mountains, were early inhabitants. Well, he went out there. The Tsarist government was absolutely baffled as to what he was really up to. He couldn't be interested in what he claimed to be interested in. And he actually discovered the first evidence, oldest evidence of human use of wheat for bread. They'd made beer before that, but this was the first time, the oldest bread in the world. And then a decade ago, Fred Hebert from now the National Geographical Society confirmed this research. But these are the founders, if you will, of official and intellectual contact between this country and Central Asia. It's not easy to pin down, so the man who is about to speak to this issue, I think we have to begin right off the bat and say it's not an easy assignment. Even the very definition of what is in, what is out in Central Asia has been defined either by the old Soviet definitions or by Orientalists and so on who have their ideas on it. And even basic terminology like the Silk Road, it's a misnomer, it's an Orientalist term. Baron Richthofen invented it. These are all sort of distorting the image and making it all the more difficult to do what our speaker today has to do on a daily basis. This is by way not of softening the roof for you, but explaining it ain't easy. Bob Blake is a career Foreign Service officer. He joined in 1985, went to Harvard, and has a degree from SAIS. He served in 4 American embassies in the Middle East and Nigeria. He then came back, served as Deputy Chief of Mission at the U.S. Mission in New Delhi from 2003-2006, and then went as ambassador to Sri Lanka and the Maldives, and was brought back in 2009 as Assistant Secretary for South and Central Asian Affairs. I'm very pleased that we have Bob Blake as a speaker today. He is going to address the 2 fundamental questions that we're all asking. What are the United States' fundamental and long-term interests in this region, and how does it propose to go about advancing them? So with that, welcome, sir.
Well, I always know I'm going to get an interesting introduction, but I never know quite what when Fred starts introducing me. I had never heard the story about Schuyler. I'll have to get that book. I'm sure it's not in print, but I'm sure you have it. That sounds like a wonderful story. My own grandfather was also served in St. Petersburg at the American Embassy, so there may be some references to him in there. So I'd be very interested to read it. Fred, I want to thank you very much for inviting me here today to participate in this wonderful forum. It's a really terrific opportunity to come back to SAIS. I come back here as often as I can. I had a wonderful 2 years at SAIS, and still I'm a great fan and supporter of the institution. I'm also very grateful for all the work and the scholarship that SAIS and that you, Fred, and all of your colleagues have done on Central Asia. And indeed, that scholarship and your ideas inform much of what we do at the State Department, and we very much appreciate all the work that you have done and all the work that we do together on this. As Fred said, I'd like to give sort of 20 minutes or so of remarks, and then I'll be glad to take questions on anything you all would like. So let me first start with just U.S. priorities in Central Asia. In 2009, the Obama administration undertook a comprehensive review of U.S. strategy in Central Asia, which aimed to build an atmosphere of trust and cooperation so we could try to build viable long-term partnerships with the Central Asian states. Through that process, several core U.S. interests emerged, encouraging Central Asian assistance in helping to stabilize Afghanistan, promoting democracy and respect for human rights, combating the trafficking of narcotics and people, supporting balanced energy policies, multiple pipelines, and the development of energy resources in Central Asia, fostering economic growth and increased opportunities for U.S. companies, and sustaining nonproliferation. A recent Senate Foreign Relations Committee report on Central Asia and the transition in Afghanistan underscored the main objectives of our strategy in the region. And the SFRC's report recommended first to balance our security and political priorities, and second, to expand the vision of transition in Afghanistan to become a working strategy for the broader region. And that's exactly what we're trying to do. It's important to note at the outset that as we think about efforts to balance competing priorities in a challenging part of the world, our interests in Central Asia are closely linked. Contrary to suggestions in some recent articles, we do not see our engagement in Central Asia as an either-or choice between developing security relationships at the expense of core values like human rights. Progress on one issue can help reinforce or create incentives for progress on other issues. And indeed, our strategy for Central Asia explicitly states that our efforts to strengthen and broaden relations with Central Asia should not impinge on our strong support for democratic development and universally recognized human rights. U.S. engagement in the 5 Central Asian states consistently focuses on political liberalization, good governance, civil society capacity building, and addressing human rights concerns, as well as a wide range of other important interests, including nonproliferation, energy, economic development, and educational exchanges. We feel strongly that the best way to advance U.S. interests across the region is by enhanced engagement at all levels with the Central Asian governments, civil society, and their people. A cornerstone of this engagement has been the annual bilateral consultation process that I chair with each of the 5 Central Asian countries. These consultations are a face-to-face structured dialogue based on a jointly developed agenda that promotes very candid discussions on the full spectrum of bilateral issues, including human rights, religious freedom, science and technology collaboration, economic development, defense cooperation, and a whole range of other subjects. The ABC process has given seats at the table to virtually the entire U.S. government, including, of course, the Departments of Energy, Commerce, U.S. Trade Representative, Defense, and many, many others. Each discussion results in a work plan of practical steps to advance U.S. and partner policy goals. And the road to achieving these goals is not always smooth, but our continued engagement with these countries is yielding results. We also use the consultative process to engage civil society and the business communities in each of these countries. Now let me talk a little bit about Afghanistan and Central Asia. The threat of terrorism makes very clear the security interests that the United States has in Central Asia. In support of the International Security Assistance Forces' efforts against the Taliban and al-Qaeda in Afghanistan, and now as Afghanistan is increasingly taking the lead for its own security, the Central Asian countries are serving as vital partners. Expanded trust and cooperation with Central Asia has made possible the Northern Distribution, or NDN as we call it. Over the past year, we've expanded the capacity of the NDN to offer critical alternative routes for our non-lethal cargo that is transiting into Afghanistan to support our troops. These have become particularly important given current challenges in our relations with Pakistan and Islamabad's decision in November to close the border crossing points into Afghanistan, effectively leaving the Northern Distribution Network as the key land route for supporting coalition forces in Afghanistan. However, the Central Asian countries' important role in contributing to stability in Afghanistan and regional security goes well beyond the Northern Distribution Network. The United States is continuing to encourage the Central Asian countries to support Afghanistan's economic and political development. A peaceful, stable, prosperous, and democratic future for the Central Asian states is directly linked to prospects for peace, stability, prosperity, and democracy in Afghanistan. Particularly as Afghanistan assumes full security responsibility, the states of Central and South Asia will play a key role in supporting peace and economic development in the region alongside Afghanistan's other partners. The South and Central Asian states' active participation in regional conferences on Afghanistan, economic cooperation, and their commitment to future assistance all contribute to the future stability of Afghanistan and the region. That's why Secretary Clinton's vision of a new Silk Road has been embraced by the countries of Central Asia. Our hope is to encourage all of the countries of the region and beyond to help build a network of roads, bridges, pipelines, and rail lines to facilitate the goal of embedding Afghanistan more firmly into its neighborhood and helping Afghanistan realize its goal of creating an economy based more on trade than aid. We must also seek to reduce barriers to the efficient exchange of goods across borders, barriers to open markets, and promote private sector investment in the region. If Afghanistan is firmly integrated into the economic life of the region, it will better be able to attract private investment, continue to develop and benefit from its vast mineral resources, and provide increasing economic opportunity for its people, men and women. All of the Central Asian states are taking their own steps to enhance their integration with Afghanistan. Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, and Turkmenistan are providing discounted electricity. Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, and Turkmenistan are increasing railway connections into Afghanistan. And Kazakhstan provides assistance to educate Afghan students. All of the Central Asian states also have participated in the recent international conferences in Istanbul and Bonn on Afghanistan. At both, there was a clear consensus and commitment to the future of Afghanistan. The participants in Istanbul made clear their support for regional trade. The Istanbul process endorses regionally integrated economic growth across historical trade routes and aligned themselves closely with the new Silk Road vision that was elaborated by Secretary Clinton. In Istanbul, likewise, participating countries agreed to a number of confidence-building measures that we believe will advance the creation of a web of economic and transit linkages across Central and South Asia. We look forward to supporting the region's efforts with the private sector to see this phase implemented. The Istanbul process represents efforts by Afghanistan and its neighbors to promote these economic links and development. At Bonn, the international community reaffirmed its commitment to stay engaged beyond 2014 in what they called a, quote, transformational decade leading up to 2024. While we've seen some successes, the development of trade among the 5 countries of Central Asia is lagging. These countries have not yet been able to reap the benefit of economic integration. To seize the opportunities for increased integration, the region's countries will need to overcome bilateral obstacles, ensure the rule of law, eradicate corruption, and remove non-tariff barriers to trade, such as border crossing impediments, lack of protection for intellectual property and copyrights, onerous and contradictory foreign investment rules, and a less than transparent and unpredictable regulatory environment. It is especially critical that the Central Asian countries reduce barriers to the efficient exchange of goods across borders, that they open their markets and promote private sector investment in the region. Our bilateral engagement in the region will continue to promote the creation of a true network of economic and transit connections, both within Central Asia and with the wider region. We also will continue to support accession by the Central Asian states to the World Trade Organization. Regional mechanisms can help. One important such mechanism is the Asian Development Bank-led Central Asia Regional Economic Cooperation Program, known as CAREC. CAREC includes Afghanistan and Pakistan and envisions a transformation of the region through transport corridors, and energy infrastructure in order to sustain economic growth. By 2020, the CAREC program will have mobilized $20 billion to improve 6 corridors that will traverse Central Asia. 3 of the CAREC corridors link the economic hubs of Europe and the Russian Federation with East Asia, while the other 3 link East Asia, Europe, and the Russian Federation with South Asia and the Middle East. The United States contributes to CAREC through the U.S. Agency for International Development in order to support activities that increasingly strengthen the concept of these revitalized historic trade routes. Just over a month ago, a train made the first trip on a new railway from Uzbekistan into Afghanistan as a proof of concept. This line was a CAREC project to supply missing links in the rail networks of China, India, and Central Asia. We hope the Central Asian states will continue to work independently and through CAREC and through other institutional arrangements and partners like the United States to reduce these barriers to trade and transportation so that the opportunities for greater regional integration can be seized. Greater integration and the improved prosperity that will follow will also help address some of the region's other pressing problems. One is the flow of narcotics. A substantial portion of the heroin produced in Afghanistan flows northward through the porous borders of Central Asia to Russia, China, and beyond. While we're working hard with the government of Afghanistan to deal with its domestic production problem, we're also increasing our cooperation with the partners in Central Asia to strengthen border security, reduce corruption, and share information in order to stem the flow of Afghan narcotics. The hallmark of this is our new Central Asia Counter-Narcotics Initiative, which is aimed at improving operational coordination between our Drug Enforcement Administration and its counterparts from Afghanistan and the Central Asian states. Upgrades to border checkpoints will not only allow for the free flow of trade and customs collection, but for the interdiction of traffickers trying to move drugs, weapons, and humans across borders. Building the capacity and professionalization of border guards, customs officials, counter-narcotics services, and other law enforcement will further our economic priorities in fostering regional economic integration, as well as encourage internal security policies that respect human rights and empower civilians. But it will also require our partners in the region to make a concerted effort to reduce corruption, a scourge that not only facilitates the drug trade, but saps the confidence of people in their leaders. Another challenge we are also working with our partners in Central Asia to address is the threat of global terrorism. Our bilateral engagement in this area includes efforts to build the capacity of governments in the region through programs such as those implemented by the State Department with funding from the Non-Proliferation, Anti-Terrorism, Demining, and Related Programs account. Multilaterally, we have supported the efforts of the UN Center for Preventive Diplomacy in Central Asia, that's based in Ashgabat in Turkmenistan, to facilitate greater consultations and cooperation within the region. They recently held a successful conference in Turkmenistan that I addressed, which resulted in the approval of a joint plan for implementing the UN counterterrorism strategy. Let me talk a little bit now about the future of democracy in Central Asia. U.S. engagement on Central Asia, on regional economic ties, and the stability and security of Afghanistan has brought us opportunities for expanded dialogue on human rights and democracy. We've seen some progress, but far more needs to be done. For instance, in 2011, Kyrgyzstan held the first peaceful, democratic transfer of power in Central Asian history. But the rest of the region continues to struggle to put into practice the democracy and human rights values enshrined in their OSCE commitments, in the UN human rights treaties to which they've acceded, and in their own domestic laws. We continue to urge the Central Asian states to address human rights and democracy concerns and to ensure space for the peaceful exercise of fundamental rights, including those of expression, assembly, association, and religious belief. There is concern that Central Asian governments could respond to the example of the Arab Spring and to the ever-present threat of terrorism by suppressing political, religious, and other freedoms. We continue to emphasize that respect for the right to free speech, media, and peaceful worship, far from giving terrorists an opportunity, will counter the threat of violent extremism and contribute to long-term stability. Likewise, strengthened rule of law and democratic institutions will help build transparent and predictable investment climates that can promote economic growth that benefits both the citizens and the leaders of these countries. Earlier, I referred to the commitments made in Bonn and Istanbul to revitalize economic connections between Central Asia and Afghanistan. Our policy in Central Asia also focuses on building each country's capacity for internal economic growth, as well as nurturing bilateral commercial ties. Central Asia's significant energy resources are certainly a motivating factor for regional economic development and integration. There is strong potential in Central Asia to develop energy resources to be used both domestically and regionally. The Turkmenistan, Afghanistan, Pakistan, India pipeline is an excellent example. Through it and other links, Central Asia has the potential to increase energy exports to South Asia and Afghanistan, and thus help to stimulate accelerated economic growth across the region. In all of our interactions, the United States urges the countries of Central Asia to encourage regional investment and entrepreneurship, including through women. Although collaboration on economic reforms and development, through collaboration on economic reforms and development, new markets will arise. The end result will be greater economic opportunity and prosperity for all. In July, the United States hosted the Central Asia and Afghanistan Women's Economic Symposium in Bishkek, which brought together women entrepreneurs and leaders from across the region and Afghanistan. Our continuing follow-on assistance to Central Asian women has resulted in efforts by the participants to form regional networks and to begin to develop cross-border business initiatives with the potential to create much more. So let me conclude by saying that expanded cooperation with the Central Asian states connected to enhancing the stability of Afghanistan has bolstered our interaction on all other issues. We will continue to hold annual bilateral consultations with each of our partners in Central Asia, and our assistance to the region in the areas of economic development, health and education, border security, counter-narcotics, counter-terrorism, democratic reform, and strengthening corridors and energy infrastructure. Sorry, I've lost my... Anyway, I've lost my place. Let me just say that we will continue to work very hard with the countries of Central Asia, both on this annual bilateral consultation process, and also to continue our assistance and to really put an emphasis on this vision of regional integration. Because we believe that if you look at this region now, you have Western Europe, Russia, China, and India, 4 poles of tremendous opportunity, and smack in the middle of those poles is Central Asia. It stands to benefit tremendously from the linkages that we hope can be developed, and we will do our best to develop in the coming years. So, again, let me just conclude by thanking Fred Starr and his team for inviting me here, and I'd be very glad to answer your questions on any subject to do with Central Asia or South Asia, if there are questions on that as well. So thank you again.
You're welcome to stay up there or be seated if you'd be more comfortable.
Why don't I stay up here just because I can see everybody from up here a little easier.
Excellent. The floor is now open. I'll ask you please to identify yourself. Yes, please. Johannes? I think there's a microphone coming.
Thank you very much for that great presentation. In particular, I thought your last statement, which wasn't in your notes, but maybe was, on this great grand vision of Central Asia in Eurasia among the poles, I think is absolutely right on. Now, my question is this. The vision, I feel, is very appropriate and helpful. My question, though, is the resources you have at your disposal to implement the vision, are they adequate to actually achieve what you're setting out, particularly if you compare your resources with those of some of the big neighbors, whether it's China with its big financial investments, Russia with its trade and financial investments, Iran with its investments, certainly in Tajikistan and other places, and so on. So my question is resources. What are the resources that you can bring to bear, and are they commensurate to implement the vision? Thank you.
Thank you. I think I'd answer that in several ways. First of all, I would start by saying that a lot of the linkages that I talked about are already underway, and the countries of the region have already started many of these. I mentioned the Turkmenistan, Afghanistan, Pakistan, India pipeline. That was an initiative undertaken by President Berdi Muhamedov, but with the strong support of the 3 other countries. The ministers, the energy ministers of both Pakistan and India yesterday again reaffirmed their intention to make forward progress on this. And there are countless other examples of how, particularly the border states of Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, and Tajikistan, are taking concrete measures on their own without international financing to get a lot of this stuff done. The second point I would make is that there are a number of other projects on the table now that would make a great deal of difference. One good example of that would be the CASA 1000 electricity transmission project, which would link Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Afghanistan, and Pakistan, and provide surplus power, particularly from Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan, to the energy-hungry economies of Pakistan and India. Afghanistan, Pakistan, and potentially India in the future as well. That's going to be a very expensive project. That's a $900 million project. But importantly, $500 million of that has already been pledged. So I think it shows that there's quite a lot of active interest there. I think there's important opportunities for private sector in many of these projects. And I want to stress that this is not something we are undertaking ourselves. What we're going to try to do is first identify what are the kind of key projects that would have an immediate impact both on Afghanistan and on Central Asia and potentially South Asia, and try to really focus on those and to make sure that every single one of those has attracted the proper financing, and if it hasn't, then to work with all of our partners in the region, but also all the multilateral development banks, the ADB, the World Bank, the Islamic Development Bank, the Aga Khan Development Network. There are many, many others who are at work. Again, think about private sector opportunities as well. And then, of course, look further afield to partners like the Japanese, the EU, and others. And I think there's a great willingness and a great understanding of the importance of this region and the importance of maintaining stability, particularly after the transition in Afghanistan in 2014.
Let me follow up if I may.
Sorry, let me just make one more point, Fred. The other point I would make is that in all of our interactions with our partners in ISAF, in the International Security Assistance Force, we've talked a lot about how as countries draw down their forces, their military forces in Afghanistan, there's going to be what we call a transition dividend. They're going to have more resources that are saved from military expenditures they would have otherwise had to make. So we're encouraging all of them to reinvest a portion of that back into Afghanistan and potentially into Central Asia to help with some of these projects. And so, again, the United States has done a tremendous amount of work inside Afghanistan. We've invested a lot of our own treasure and blood to help develop some of the big infrastructure projects inside Afghanistan. But it's also now time, I think, to look further afield at all these other networks that I talked about in my speech. Sorry, Fred.
If I could follow up Johannes Lind's question about TAPI.
Yeah.
Juan Miranda of the Asia Development Bank from this podium in September said basically it's not going to be built unless the U.S. really gets in behind it. So it's not a matter, in his view, and I've heard the same thing in Ashgabat, of our encouraging others to step up, but concretely, what is the United States prepared to do to make TAPI happen? And is this a strategic priority or is it just an economic possibility?
No, I think it's a strategic priority, and we'd like to see it go forward. And again, I think, I'd come back to what I said earlier. I think India has a huge interest in seeing this project proceed and has given its strong backing to this. The main challenge now is to, I think, find an international oil company that's going to be willing to kind of take this project on and be its champion. And to do that, that's, of course, they're going to have to undertake a certain amount of risk, particularly in building a pipeline across Afghanistan and Pakistan. So they have to have some benefits of their own. So that's why there's now a lot of conversations with the Turkmen in particular about, how to structure that so that, they're also going to derive benefits. And obviously,
but in the case of the BTC pipeline, the U.S. handled the risk issue. Mm-hmm. Is the U.S. prepared to do the same for this?
We're still at a relatively preliminary stage here. And it may be that we might have to do that. But so far, there hasn't been such a request, and we've wanted to let the companies the countries in particular kind of continue to be in the lead on this. But so we'll see. But again, I think India has got a very strong interest in particular, and it's going to be the country with that's going to be the key market for this gas. So we look to them in particular for their cues, in addition to the Turkmen themselves.
Thank you.
Katya Chertova, I'm from the Cohen Group. I would like to ask your thoughts on the progress of the NDN to date, as well as plans for the future. Thank you.
I think we've made tremendous progress over the last several years on the Northern Distribution Network, and I think a lot of that has been because of the improved trust and confidence between us and all of our partners along the NDN. But it's also because they see it as in their own interest to do. They have a great interest in the stabilization of Afghanistan, and they very much want to see the transition that is now underway succeed, both the security transition that's underway, but also the economic transition that's underway that I talked about, from an aid-based economy in Afghanistan to a trade-based economy, and one that's going to provide jobs for young Afghans and opportunities for young Afghans. And that's why you see the Turkmen announcing that they're going to quintuple their electricity exports. That's not from any urging from us. This is something that they are doing spontaneously because they see that it is in their own interest. That's why you see the Uzbeks developing rail links and working very closely with the ADB to extend the rail link all the way to Mazar-e Sharif, so that there is, in fact, this linkage now. That's why you see the Tajiks doing a lot of very similar projects on their own. Of course, they have fewer resources than the other countries. But still, I think it's very, very important to note that all of these countries are taking their own initiatives to help Afghanistan. And I think that shows that both the importance that they attach to helping Afghanistan see itself through this process, but also the importance that they see in establishing these regional linkages. Again, if you're a Tajik or an Uzbek, you're a landlocked country, you're looking for how are you going to export. Many of them right now have to export back through the Baltics to get their exports out. It's a very attractive option if the rail, road, and other networks can be developed south through Pakistan or India to dramatically cut the times for which their exports have to get to their key markets. So they are very, very interested in developing these networks, and again are taking their own steps to help.
In the far back, yes, please. And then over here.
Hi.
Thank God for microphones.
Hi. My name is Matthew Carroll. I'm a second-year American Foreign Policy student here.
Welcome.
My question is about the other players in the region. Certainly, I'm sure everyone in the world shares a vision of, hopes for a vision of prosperity in Central Asia, but sometimes our interests don't overlap. And specifically, I'd like you to address how we work with our partners in China and Russia to move things forward there.
Thank you. That's a very good question. The answer is we and I personally have made a significant effort to work with the Chinese and to work with the Russians. I think part of the strategic opening that we had in Central Asia was based on the fact that President Obama, made a real effort to first reset relations with Russia. And I think a lot of the countries in Central Asia kind of took their cue from Russia, because Russia obviously has tremendous influence in Central Asia, and saw that this was also an opportunity for them to work more closely with the United States. And all of them wanted that. They welcome our presence, in part because they see it as a counterbalance to Russia and potentially to China as well, but also because they very much recognized the important role that the United States has to play in Afghanistan. So they, if anything, they want to see us stay longer in Afghanistan. So they're a very strong supporter of what we're trying to accomplish in Afghanistan. With Russia, we've sought to be as transparent as possible about what we're trying to accomplish. We've told the Russians we are not seeking long-term bases of any kind in Afghanistan. We have short-term needs in places like Manas in Kyrgyzstan, through which most of our troops that go into Afghanistan transit. But that we are not trying to in any way displace the Russians from Central Asia. Right? Quite the contrary. We're looking for ways that we can try to cooperate more with Russia. Counter-narcotics is a very good example where, again, we're working not only with Afghanistan and the countries of Central Asia, but also importantly with Russia. They are the main market for a lot of this narcotics trade, and the main victim in many ways of this trade. So it's important that and we think there are real terrific opportunities to work with them. Likewise on health cooperation in Central Asia. So we're always looking for ways that we can do more, and we spend a great deal of time just exchanging information, telling them what we're doing, and I think that's helped a lot. Because Russia's in a very good position to block what we're trying to do if they chose to. China, again, we don't have as much background with the Chinese talking about Central Asia, so that's been a bit more difficult to establish a dialogue. But I think now we've had several rounds of that dialogue, and it becomes more candid and helpful every time we have one. I just had another round 2 weeks ago, maybe a week and a half ago now, where a very senior Chinese delegation came to Washington, and we had 6 hours of talks. So, we talk in great detail now about what we're trying to accomplish. And again, the Chinese have very similar interests in both Afghanistan and to a certain extent in Pakistan as well, certainly on the counterterrorism side. And they're beginning to invest more in Afghanistan as well, which we welcome. We'd like to see them do even more in terms of helping with investment of infrastructure inside Afghanistan, similar to what they're already doing on a huge scale in the countries of Central Asia, particularly with the energy infrastructure. So again, I think we have a lot of common interests that form the basis for a very sound dialogue. We don't always see eye to eye on everything, particularly on things like human rights, but that's okay. We'll work our way through that and certainly seize the opportunities that we do have.
Yes, sir, right here.
Thank you. Thank you. My name is Jos Boonstra from Europe Central Asia Monitoring. I'm based in Brussels. Thank you for your presentation. I have 2 questions, both concerning security. You mentioned in the beginning of your presentation military cooperation. Does it involve security sector reform? And if so, does it involve governance issues and reform? Secondly, border control, you were quite extensive on that. There are many initiatives in Central Asia and also in Afghanistan on border control. The EU is doing work, the US of course is very active, Russia is very active with advisors, China delivers material, and so on, UN, OSCE, and so on. Sorry. So there are many donors active in border control. A lot of money has been invested. Is there any concrete result over the last few years? We see a lot of figures, but as you said yourself, corruption is a huge problem. And is there coordination between all these donors, between even China that is delivering material, between all the Russian advisors and so on? And how do you envisage this border control and integrated border control within the new vision of a new Silk Road? Thank you.
Let me take the second question first. In terms of coordination, there's very good coordination that takes place. We rely on our ambassadors to really perform that function. And in almost every case, there's groups of donors that meet on a very regular basis to coordinate what each other is doing so that there's not duplication of effort, but also to share information about what each other is doing and how we can work together and how we can work, of course, with the host government. So there's a lot of I think, quite good cooperation. I think, as I said earlier, much remains to be done in terms of results, particularly on the counter-narcotics front, where I just think that there's much more to be done on that front. And I think a large portion of the reason that we haven't been able to make more progress is because there is still quite significant corruption in many of these countries. They're poor countries. There's a very significant temptation, and so this is something where I think we just have to be clear, because we have to make sure that our assistance is going to be used in a proper way, and that we're not just pouring money into an exercise that's not going to achieve results. So we have a very results-oriented approach. In terms of military assistance, first of all, we don't have a lot of military assistance in the region. It's quite modest if you look at the figures. And to the extent that we do training where it's allowed, there's always a governance and human rights component to it.
Yes, sir. Right here.
My name's Thomas Grindley.
Could you stand, please?
Excuse me.
Could you stand, please?
You have to stand to sing for your supper.
My name's Thomas Grindley. In the period between 1980 and 1990, when the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan, to what extent were the Central Asian republics willing partners? Do they carry any baggage from this intervention which would make it difficult for them to cooperate with Afghanistan?
I think Fred Starr is probably a better person to answer that question. I wasn't even in the State Department in the early part of the 1980s, so I really can't answer that question. But I can tell you now, in terms of the baggage question, I don't think they carry baggage. I think they have very clear-eyed interests in what they're trying to accomplish and what they're trying to get out of their relations with the United States, as do we. And so I think there has been, as I say, quite a good convergence on a lot of issues with the Russians, and we'll continue to try to find continued convergence because, again, we think we do have common interests, particularly with respect to Afghanistan.
It would be like asking, did the United States have baggage with regard to Europeans because the British were fighting France in the 18th century? Central Asians were under imperial rule.
That's 200 years ago.
No, this was till 1991. So obviously, this wasn't their game. The Soviet invasion of Afghanistan was not. I'm not aware of any vote in the republics of Central Asia on whether you want to do this or not. On the contrary, they first sent in troops from Central Asia, and they were very quickly withdrawn because it was quite clear that they didn't have their heart in it. So the answer, I think, is very clearly no. The Central Asians are very credible in Afghanistan, every single country.
Other questions? Yes, ma'am. Sorry, I usurped the role of the moderator.
Thank you. I'm now Bahori Mamova from the Voice of America. I have two questions.
Please.
One is specifically on Uzbekistan. What was the main reason behind the decision to provide assistance to Uzbekistan despite the congressional restrictions? Can you tell us more about that? What are the conditions? How is it going to work? And exactly what kind of an aid are we talking about? Secondly...
Sorry, let me answer that
sure.
question first. My mind isn't supple enough to remember too many questions at once. First of all, with respect to military assistance for Uzbekistan, we haven't yet provided any military assistance in terms of new FMF or anything like that. We're in the process now of exercising a waiver that would allow us to provide limited non-lethal assistance to Uzbekistan. But we need to consult very closely with Congress going forward on this. I think everybody understands that this is in our interest to do because it is to support our troops. It's a limited 6-month waiver, and we have to, again, provide a report to Congress about not only what we're doing to how we're using the money, but also what we're doing in other areas of our relations with Uzbekistan. But we've had a very extensive series of consultations with the Hill, both on the Senate side and on the House side, that I've led with colleagues from the Department of Defense and from our Political Military Affairs Bureau. And we'll continue to do that. And I think we appreciate the support that Congress has provided for this initiative.
One more question, if I could. Sometimes there seems to be more talk about regional integrity in Central Asia here in Washington than in the region itself. You did talk about the bilateral consultations with each country and, what kind of issues you are discussing with them. Is there any effort from this administration to bring the countries of Central Asia, maybe the leaders around one table and hear what they have to say?
When you say regional integrity, did you mean integration?
Yes,
okay.
Integration, yes, sorry.
Regional integrity, that's a whole new initiative that may be beyond my scope. Regional integration. No, there's no effort on our part to bring all the leaders together, but of course they come together frequently in the SCO context, in the CSTO context, and many other contexts. But we have very much encouraged regional integration. We have our own regional trade and investment framework agreement discussions that take place at a regional level. But I have to say, that those haven't made much progress. So we're also pursuing bilateral interests because our companies have a lot of interest, particularly in Kazakhstan and to a certain extent in Turkmenistan and Uzbekistan as well. So obviously we want to work with them and help them to identify opportunities and support them as they work in those countries. But again, I think there's undeniable logic to moving ahead with regional integration. Central Asia remains one of the least integrated regions in the world, and therefore there's really quite substantial opportunities both for the peoples and the governments of the region to seize those. So we're doing a combination of advocacy, but also of working on the sometimes painstaking, what I would call software of regional integration, which is helping with customs clearance procedures and how do you, again, reduce corruption and a lot of those other things. And I think that's an important part of our efforts going forward on the new Silk Road and, again, the historical trade routes, is to, again, work with the countries to help them to reduce a lot of the kind of practical barriers that exist to enhance trade and integration between these countries. And again, all of these countries have an interest in seeing greater opportunity for their people, particularly their young people. And so I think we do have an opportunity to try to move ahead on that. But they tend to see those in terms of bilateral trade opportunities, Uzbekistan with Kazakhstan or Tajikistan with Kyrgyzstan, as opposed to more of a regional. But we hope that over time, the regional logic will better manifest itself. And again, I think a lot of these projects that I referred to will help to sort of inculcate that regional thinking.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. My name is Muhyiddin Tojev. I'm a visiting scholar from the George Mason University. I have two questions, if I may.
Please.
First, regarding
From now on, we're going to confine you just to one, please. There are a lot of...
All right, one question.
Well, Tajikistan is struggling for construction of Rogun hydropower plant for many years, and it believes that it can both provide the country's needs internally and also provide surplus energy to other countries. What is the position of the United States towards the construction of this power plant? And the second question is that after...
Let me answer that question first.
That's it.
Our position on Rogun is that the World Bank is now undertaking some quite important feasibility studies that are looking at the entire energy picture, including Rogun, and what is the most effective way to improve Tajikistan's energy future. Obviously, the government has a great interest, and President Rahmon has a great interest in the Rogun project itself. But I think there are a number of other projects as well that deserve a close look. And so I think the World Bank is doing that. The World Bank has extensive experience working on water and energy issues, including in the India-Pakistan context that I also work in. So I think they're very well suited to do this. And we expect those feasibility studies to be done sometime later this year. And we've urged our friends in Tajikistan not to take any unilateral actions before those feasibility studies are completed, because that could jeopardize international financing for some of these projects.
Josh, in the back.
Hi, Josh Kuchera. I'm a freelance journalist. I have a single two-part question about the recent elections in Kazakhstan.
That's good, Josh.
The U.S. the State Department endorsed the OSCE statement saying that there were significant problems with the election. Since then,
Kazakhstan, we are.
Yeah, we're on the Kazakhstan elections. The U.S. endorsed the OSCE statement saying there were significant problems. Since then, the government of Kazakhstan has kind of tried to delegitimize the OSCE's monitoring mission, saying that there's all these other monitors, the SCO and so on, CIS, who found no problems with it. Are you troubled by this sort of rhetoric coming from Kazakhstan that they're delegitimizing the OSCE results? Secondly, right after that happened,
let me just answer that question.
On Monday.
Sorry.
We're down to one.
I mean, that's an easy response, which is that we, again, strongly support the work of the OSCE, not only in Kazakhstan, but around Central Asia and beyond. And we indeed participated in the OSCE mission and had our own observers. So, yes, we definitely endorse what they said. And but at the same time, I think it's important to note that there now is a multi-party system in Kazakhstan. And so, as our own statement indicated, we look forward to engaging with that new multi-party system and to, again, try to further encourage the development of democracy and human rights in Kazakhstan.
Yes, sir. Right here in front.
Thank you very much. My name is Takeuchi. I'm a Japanese scholar and of SAIS, and I'm specialized in South Asia.
Welcome.
So apart from Central Asia, but it's related to your idea of regional integration. So how do you appreciate the function of potentiality of SAARC, as a regional integration driver? So I know that U.S. supported that idea, but it has been relatively slow, very slow. In spite of that model, what is ASEAN countries integration? But it's SAARC has a very critical problem that India is too big, so that it's very heavy, and in Pakistan, the relation has also been reflected. So that, how is your idea?
Well, I have the honor of being in charge of the two regions of the world that are probably the least integrated, not within both Central Asia and South Asia, but also between Central and South Asia. So just as I said on the Central Asia side, there's a huge amount of work to be done in South Asia as well to promote regional integration. Intra-regional trade in South Asia is about 5% of total trade, which is a shame because, again, there's tremendous opportunities there. In SAARC, the problem is not that India is too big. The problem has been that SAARC operates by consensus, as almost all regional organizations do, and there's been an absence of consensus between India and Pakistan, which has held back the development of SAARC. But I think that recent progress between India and Pakistan, particularly over the last year, has really begun to change that dynamic in a very important way. And next month, the Indian Commerce Secretary will be making a very important visit to the Wagah border between India and Pakistan to inaugurate new customs facilities there with his Pakistani counterpart, and then taking a business delegation from India to Pakistan. And I think that reflects the understanding that both these countries have, that there are tremendous, as yet unrealized opportunities to expand trade between India and Pakistan, and that it would have tremendous benefits for both countries, particularly for Pakistan, which right now is facing a great many economic and energy and other challenges. And so we very much welcome this process and do everything we can to encourage this process. But again, all credit to these two countries for moving forward on that. I think I'll just leave it at that. I mean, I think there's a lot that's still to be done, but there's a potential as a result of the progress that's being made to probably double trade in a very short order, and basically bring a lot of the trade that now goes informally via Dubai and other countries directly between the two countries, and that's going to be a substantial new benefit for the people of those two countries.
But let me follow up on your very interesting and very important point about India-Pakistan cross-border trade, which is enormous already. Right. That really puts the focus on the Pakistan-Afghan border, because the Afghan Central Asian borders and Iranian borders are functioning. The U.S. took a very active role beginning in 2004-03 in bringing about the Afghan-Pakistan trade and
transit trade agreement.
Transit trade and trade agreement. It's an extremely important document. If that were actually in effect today, then the great engine that you've talked about of continental trade, not regional trade, something much bigger, continental trade, would absolutely start rolling.
Correct.
So now, are we going to be a well-wisher and passive observer of this, or is there anything the U.S. can do to prioritize that issue and start the machine working?
Sorry, are you talking about the India-Pakistan one, or the
implementation of the Pakistan-Afghanistan trade and transit agreement?
Well, yes. I mean, obviously, we're doing everything we can to try to encourage that and the implementation of the AFPAC transit trade agreement. But again, I think even more important right now is furthering this progress between India and Pakistan, because that's really the main holdup right now. And if the two countries, India and Pakistan, can finally agree to allow transit trade through their two countries, so that an Indian trucker could send goods directly through Pakistan and Afghanistan and into Central Asia and beyond, that would be a huge change. Right now, an Indian exporter has to go either via China or via Iran. And, both of those are complicated. It takes a long time. And, I think the Indians have a tremendous interest in doing more in Central Asia. So this is one factor that's helping to move this forward. But I think likewise, the Central Asians also see India as a real pole of opportunity for them. Don't forget, India is going to be the third largest economy in the world, probably in the next 15 years or so, and is already expanding at 7% a year, possibly more if economic reform measures can be taken. So again, there's a tremendous opportunity for the Central Asians to begin to export and expand their integration. But the India-Pakistan part of that equation is the one part of it that still needs to be sorted out.
Yes, please.
I'm Liz Wishnick from the Woodrow Wilson Center. My question is about the CSTO and the SCO. What kind of role do you see them playing in the post-ISAF security environment?
It's difficult to make predictions about the CSTO. We don't have a role in CSTO, so we don't really have a great deal of insight into the operations of the CSTO. There have been opportunities for the CSTO to sort of do more. Right after, in the beginning of the problems in Kyrgyzstan last year, there was an opportunity for CSTO to perhaps help out in modest ways, and they declined the opportunity to do so. And so I can't really comment. You really have to ask them what they see as the future. But again, we're going to continue to engage bilaterally with the members of the CSTO. And so far, that bilateral engagement has been good, and we're going to do everything we can to sustain that positive bilateral engagement. Same thing. I mean, we're not a member, we're not an observer in SCO, but we engage positively with every single one of the SCO members, and whether we should seek some sort of observer status of some sort is still under review in the administration.
Thank you.
Hi, good evening. Mr. Ambassador, I represent Asia Plus News Agency from Tajikistan.
Welcome.
I heard that you just conducted roundtable, big discussion about the role of Islam in the region and Central Asia at Foreign Service Institute last week, right?
That was off the record, but I guess it wasn't that off the record, huh?
Yeah, I just would like to ask, what's your, how would you assess the role of Islam in our region in Central Asia? Do you think that it's possible that potentially in future, maybe one day, political Islam can come to power? And do you think there is a threat that this Islam could be radical? And do you consider this as a possible threat to the region or to the United States? Thank you.
I don't believe that there is a serious radical Islamic threat inside many of these countries now. But I do think that all of the countries, to a limited, it's hard to generalize, but all of them are worried about what they see as growing Islamic influence. And as I said in my remarks, all of them are reacting in a way that we disagree with. Our view is that it's very, very important to distinguish between terrorists who want to use their religion and use violence to achieve their objectives, and those who want to exercise their right to peaceful worship. And I think the vast majority of people in Central Asia fall into the latter category. They want to just be able to exercise their religious beliefs peacefully. But many of the governments are suspicious of that and fear that that will provide an opportunity for more radical elements to organize against these governments. Again, it's a very tricky question, but my view, and I think our view in the government, is that if you do not allow peaceful worship, if you do not allow parties like the Islamic Revival Party in Tajikistan to operate, you simply drive people underground, and you also take people who might otherwise be quite moderate and turn them into people who will become more radical. So it's very, very important to provide these peaceful opportunities for worship and assembly and media and all the things that we talked about. And this is a continuing dialogue that we have with all of our friends in Central Asia. And I think it's a really important question for them to consider. And it's one part of a larger question that they're all grappling with, which is they've followed carefully what's going on in the Arab Spring. And they have to, I think, take a hard look at inward and sort of see what the lessons of those are. And I think the lessons are that you have to be responsive to the needs and to the wishes of your people, and that you need to address things like corruption. And that I think the example of Kyrgyzstan showed that it's very easy. A country like Kyrgyzstan and a regime like that of Bakiyev very quickly lost control of the situation in a matter of days. And the Kyrgyz, in fact, talk about how they, in many ways, were one of the first countries of the Arab Spring. And they were the progenitor of the Arab Spring. Maybe they were. But I think there is an important lesson there for all of the countries of Central Asia, is that they have to pay attention, they have to open up their societies, and they need to address some of these questions like corruption that are very, very important. And as I said in my remarks, they sap the confidence of people in their leaders. So it's, again, it's important to be responsive. And so, again, this is something that we talk a lot about in our relations with our friends and, of course, with civil society.
Thank you so much. My name is Elbek. I'm a visiting scholar from Uzbekistan at the SAIS, Central Asia Caucasus Institute.
Oh, welcome.
Thank you. And my question is the following. You have just mentioned about regional integration institutions in this region.
Yes.
And if we have a look on the region, there is a bunch of different organizations on economic, political, military cooperation tied up mostly with Russia. So now it is seasoned with another union called Super Eurasian or whatever. So from this perspective, does it have any impact on U.S. interests on the region? And does it make the picture a bit different, a future picture of the region a bit different from U.S. vision? Thank you.
Well, first of all, we'll have to see what the Eurasian Economic Union is actually going to entail. There hasn't been much in the way of real specifics yet about this. But I think we've said publicly and also privately to our friends, including in Russia, that we do not want to see the Eurasian Economic Union become a zone of exclusion. That on the contrary, all of us are seeking to make Central Asia a zone of opportunity and a zone of free trade. And that's why we are strongly encouraging all the countries in the region to accede to the WTO and, again, to take every step they can to try to open up opportunities and not, in fact, exclude either member states or countries that are further afield. So, I think we will continue to be strong advocates for open trade and expanding opportunities for the people of Central Asia as much as possible with as many trade partners as possible. And that includes China and Russia and the United States and the European Union and India and all the rest, because that's really how this region is going to benefit.
Bob, if this discussion were taking place in a medieval university, there would have been a guy sitting here, or where I am, whose title would be Advocatus Diaboli, the devil's advocate.
So that's you, huh?
And if you'll excuse me, I'd like to play that role for a second. Simply because, for the same reason they had it in medieval scholastic debates. Specifically, look, you have spoken very eloquently and eloquently about enhanced engagement. And even if it's not enhanced engagement to the degree that everyone might wish, just essential continuity, which I hear a lot of. I mean, all the points that you made on the strategic side have been made here at this forum since about 2003. It's the same collection, and it's not to say it's a wrong collection, but there is essential continuity. So what has changed, I asked myself, as Advocatus Diaboli? Well, we're leaving Afghanistan. We've set a deadline and told everyone in the region we're out of there. Beyond that, the funding for all the activities that you've described is diminishing. And beyond, in fact, meeting after meeting, they say, well, that's a great idea, but it costs money and we don't have it. And then third, we have a new security doctrine that has been approved in the White House, which basically says that what counts for us is East Asia and the Middle East. The implication, unstated, is that everything in between we want to get out of and get off our back as fast as possible. Would someone in the region who concludes from that the United States, in a very polite and constructive way, is frankly disengaging? And to the extent that it's not, it's handing over its equities in the region to Russia and China in a way that is not particularly welcomed by us in the region. Would such a voice be wrong? And if so, why?
It would be wrong. And I appreciate your being the devil's advocate. But let me address some of your suppositions. First of all, we're not leaving Afghanistan. We are withdrawing our military from Afghanistan, and we are in the process, at the same time, building up the Afghan National Security Forces so they themselves can take responsibility for their own security. That process is going well so far, but there's still a lot more to be done before the end of 2014. So we'll continue to be very focused on that portion of it. At the same time, we have bilateral negotiations going on with Afghanistan about what our residual presence will be in Afghanistan. We don't want to repeat the same mistakes that we made in the early part of this decade, where we took our eyes off the ball and focused on Iraq and allowed the Taliban to kind of reconstitute themselves. So I think the President has been very clear that we're going to continue to have a very strong economic relationship with Afghanistan going forward and continue to provide substantial assistance to the Afghan people. And I think we'll continue to provide a lot, we'll have, again, some military presence. I don't yet know what that will be because that's subject to negotiations. But obviously we want to continue to be able to prevent the reemergence of al-Qaeda and others in this region. So that will be an abiding interest of ours. So that's the first point. On the question of resources diminishing, again, I would challenge that. I mean, I think, in fact, maybe the military resources are diminishing, but our hope is that, in fact, there will be increased economic resources to help these countries. And that's certainly what we're encouraging and what all of the NATO and ISAF partners are encouraging. That will be, I think, a focus of a very important conference that the Japanese will be hosting in Tokyo this summer, to talk about the economic future of Afghanistan and how everybody can help. So all of us are very, very focused on that, and I think that there will continue to be very strong support, not just by the United States, but by other partners to continue to support Afghanistan, to continue to help Afghanistan to develop its own private sector and to stand on its own feet economically. And that's why I think we're putting such an emphasis on this historical trade routes vision, is because we do see that this is going to be such an important part of linking Afghanistan with Central Asia, with India, and with other markets further afield. So does that answer your question? I mean, again, I think we will have an enduring commitment to Afghanistan, and because of that commitment, we will also have a very enduring commitment to the Central Asians, because the Central Asians are in the process now of knitting themselves more closely with Afghanistan, and again, share a very strong interest in all of the things that I just talked about.
Yes, please. Yes. There's no...
Kathy Cosman, U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom. While I certainly agree with your comments about the fears of the Central Asian governments vis-a-vis Islam, I think it's probably also true that within the last 2 years or so, and in some cases before 2 years, the laws on religion and the policies towards religious groups in general, particularly Islam, but other religious groups as well, has worsened throughout Central Asia. So while I'm sure this is an important topic in your ABCs, I don't know if it's very successful. And I also, finally, since we're using ABCs, I wanted to raise the question of CPC, namely that Uzbekistan was named a country of particular concern, and yet a few weeks after that, at an international meeting, namely an OSCE meeting, it was very difficult in the official U.S. speech to even have a mention of the fact that Uzbekistan had just been named a CPC. So I'm wondering, what is the use of CPC if it's not even a rhetorical device? So I rest my case, such as it is.
Well, I agree with you that there has been setbacks to religious freedom across Central Asia. But, these countries are acting in what they see as their own interests. And it just reinforces the importance of us working with them and talking to them and trying to explain to them how we see things. Now, they happen to disagree with us on these things. And, they think often that we're naive and that by creating an opportunity for, let's say, greater freedom of worship, you actually are giving an opportunity for people to organize. So, we just have a difference on that. But, we have a coordinator, a person who works full-time on this and who's going to be, I think, spending more time now, Suzanne Johnson-Cook, who's going to be spending more time in Central Asia. And I very much have encouraged that. And again, I think it's only through direct, patient, constructive dialogue that we're going to hopefully work and persuade these countries to do things and to persuade them that it's in their own interest to do these things. I think that's the key. And so far we've been unable to do that. And on the contrary, they see it as in their own interest now to curb, in many cases, religious rights, precisely because they see a threat to expanding those rights. So this will continue to, as I said earlier, to be a very important focus of what we're trying to do in Central Asia.
Bob, I see Tim McGraw and other business people here in the audience. Let me put a question in their behalf because they seem strangely timid today. And that is, you've hardly mentioned American investment in this part of the world. And you did mention the TIFAs, as even though it's something I followed with some interest, that the Central Asians themselves were pushing for it, and we were the ones that didn't follow. What's going on in it? Is there a real serious prospect for investment other than the big ticket items? And if so, how are we going to pave the way for that?
Thanks, Fred. Again, this has been a pretty important effort that we've made with many of these countries. In Kazakhstan, frankly, we don't need to do very much in the way of business promotion because there's already a tremendous amount of American investment there. And the challenge in Kazakhstan is really more to help diversify the economy. And I think that we will see more progress in that regard. And certainly we're doing everything we can to encourage that. In some of the other countries of the region, frankly, the business climate is still very tough for American or any other international business partners. And it's incumbent on all of these countries to understand that they're competing with the rest of the world to attract American and other international investment. And therefore, it's in their own interest to provide the best possible investment climate for American companies. And I think American companies would very much like to do more in all of the Central Asian states, but I think particularly Uzbekistan and Turkmenistan, where there's a lot of unrealized opportunities. And again, I think we've worked hard with both of those countries to try to have a real dialogue. We have very helpful chambers here through which we work as well, composed of the main American companies that are already doing business or are interested in doing business in both of those countries. I personally have led trade delegations to both of those countries. So I think there is interest, but it's also important for the countries, again, to continue to do everything they can to open up the investment climate, to allow for things like currency convertibility, to reduce very simple things like the length of time it takes to get a business visa to go to some of these countries. And so there's still, I think, quite a long way to go. And again, American business can be such an important partner for these countries in terms of bringing in new entrepreneurship and new innovation and new ways of doing things. And it's just a terrific, again, partnership opportunity for them. And we've done everything we can to try to bring the two sides together. And now we hope to kind of, frankly, reap some of the benefits of that and see some new investment and see some new contracts emerge from all that effort.
Yes, please. We're closing in on the end here.
Good afternoon. Good evening. Vincent O'Shea from OSCE, Osh, Kyrgyzstan. I was hoping you could give us some insight on what importance you place on the potential for localized conflict in remote areas in Kyrgyzstan, such as Batken province, given its remoteness from the seat of power, and a very ethnically mixed population which has been fluctuating through migrant work, and very emotive subjects such as land ownership and water rights.
First of all, I want to thank the OSCE for a lot of the tremendous work that they did in Kyrgyzstan last year and continue to do. There's a very important community security initiative that is still underway in Osh, and I think that's had quite an important impact. To address your question, I think our assessment is that there's still quite a lot of tension, ethnic tension, in southern Kyrgyzstan. For a variety of reasons. First, a lot of the problems that were surfaced in the Kylyunin report have not been addressed, particularly on the question of justice. Most of the people who have been brought to justice for all of the various violations and crimes and murders that occurred last year have been ethnic Uzbeks, even though ethnic Uzbeks were the main victims, but not the only victims. So I think that must continue to be a very important priority. There have been some very high-profile cases like that of Mr. Askarov that have, I think, sent a very disturbing message to the Uzbek community about whether they can expect justice from Kyrgyzstan. So I think the more positive news is that President Atabbayev and his team very much recognize the work that needs to be done to address reconciliation and to improve relations between the communities. And he himself has talked about that in his early days and in his meetings with us and others. So I'm encouraged to hear that, and I think it's one of the highest priorities now is to make real progress on reconciliation and bring these communities together so that a more lasting stability can be achieved in southern Kyrgyzstan in particular.
Ladies and gentlemen, I think we're all indebted to Assistant Secretary Blake for really a very candid discussion, and no less important, more important perhaps, is a very forthright, formal statement that you delivered at the beginning of the program. It seems to me that you've offered a very healthy balance between activities that are, in effect, damage control and which are, on the other hand, implementation of a vision for the future, and one that we do share with the countries involved. What does the success or failure of this depend on? Probably on three different factors. One is the U.S. going to be really clear about its priorities? It can't do all these things, obviously. The energy is limited. To identify just a very few things that really are the keys, as you've suggested. If we're able to do that, we'll succeed. Second is the transition dividend that you've referred to several times. That is an expression of hope on your part, which we respect and welcome. It sure isn't in any budget that I've seen. And no one in the region thinks it's going to be. So that's the second concern. And the third is our will. Is this region going to continue in the American mind to be a source of problems, or is it potentially an area where a dramatic turnaround in the case of Afghanistan and progress in the case of all the other countries is possible, and in a way that is not against anyone but benefits everyone? The question of will has to remain open. I mean, we're waiting to see. Will the Secretary speak about these matters? Will the President speak about these matters? Will they defend them before Congress? Will they defend them before the American public? And what kind of signals will we give to the countries involved? These are all very important issues. They're direct between us and them. They're not between us and China, us and Russia, even us and India. It's between us and them. What kind of signals will they get? And since you're one of the key signal givers, I think everyone in this room wants to wish you all success.
Thank you.
Thank you.